Hello, this conversation is about looking at a deeper dive into adaptive versus technical change and its implications for leading innovation. This presentation fits well into other parts of the leading innovation conversation and also into values-driven leadership as well, if it's appropriate to the audience. The distinction of technical versus adaptive change was created by Ron Heifetz, a professor at the Harvard Kennedy School. And it really looks at different ways of leading and the consequences of those different changes, which we'll get into. So the typical outcomes for this are to appreciate the drivers of change, to recognize when adaptive change is needed, and to clarify the leadership required for adaptive change, and then to take it back home as is relevant to the audience. So let's just think about the drivers of change and innovation. Everything exists in change in a gap, the gap between where we are and where we want to be. It can be small, like we are home and we want to get to a particular destination. In an organization, it can be that we are in a place that we don't want to be in our industry, and we want to move to a different place, a different market share, a different outcome in terms of health, anything it is, but it's a bigger challenge. And so the gap between where we are and where we want to be is important. And along with that, a shared reality of where we are, because you'll often find in organizations, people differ about, oh, it's not so bad, and there's a lot of opinions, but really have a data-based understanding of where we are and also where we're going, what our vision is for the future. And there's the urgency to cross that gap. It's one thing to have a gap, it's another thing to feel the urgency to cross that gap. So it's worth asking where that energy comes from. Before then, I want to touch on what is technical versus adaptive change. So technical change is, well, we faced this before, we know how to do it, and we can meet this challenge. In other words, it's change that is smaller, generally, and more readily engineered. We just can lay it out from beginning to end. Adaptive change is something we've never faced before. We don't have the blueprint already in mind, and the gap is larger in this case, and how to cross it isn't always clear. So the question is, well, how could you create urgency for this adaptive change? Well, one way it's created, and the easiest way, is a threat to survival. In that case, the burning platform creates the urgency. We have to look no further than COVID to see this, a pandemic that threatened millions upon millions of lives, provided the urgency and provided actually a ways to look at our way we collaborated in the pharmaceutical industry, with government, how we work together as organizations, how we worked as a society, brought it all to the fore, given that burning platform. And then at an organizational level, it created change. Now the challenge has created the urgency. How do we test people? How do we keep people safe? How do we deal with people in the ICU, for example, in COVID? How do we vaccinate people? And the hardest way to create urgency is when there's no immediate threat to survival and no apparent immediate challenge. And that is a leadership challenge, to create the urgency, to say, here, look, here's where we are. Here's where we need to be in the future. And we don't really know how to get there yet, but we're going to go on this journey together because we are compelled to do this. We want to be in a different place in our market. We want to have different health outcomes and a different impact on our community than we've had up till now. We want to optimize something that is sub-optimized right now so we can claim a part of the market that's emerging. These are cases that are brought by leadership, and they need to be compelling because the general mood tends to be, well, it's not so bad. So the compelling case is really important. Let's talk about leading technical versus adaptive change. So in a technical change, you have existing skills and way of doing things, they're fine. Engineered, yes, it can be hard, it can be uncomfortable, it can be difficult, but it doesn't challenge our assumptions about what's possible because we've done it before. We know how to go about it. And the participants tend to be limited and often the usual suspects who we know and we can rely on to produce the result. Different from that is adaptive change. Adaptive change demands new skills and new ways of thinking. It's emergent. It's a path created by walking. Yes, it is often hard and uncomfortable as well, but it does challenge assumptions about what is possible. And it requires a wider diversity of participants and a spirit of inclusion and collaboration. And in this case, the leader is a visionary, someone who holds a vision for the future, but also a facilitator that brings the resources together. And there you can see COVID clearly. New skills and new ways of thinking. A path made by walking. We try things, didn't work, try other things, they work. Often hard and uncomfortable, clearly. Challenged assumptions about what is possible. And we'll come to that in a moment. It requires a diversity of participants and a spirit of inclusion and collaboration. We saw that too. And again, this leadership of we can actually bring this pandemic under control. So if we look at COVID and we look at organizational level, we didn't think about this, but we realized we had parking lots and we could put stuff on parking lots and we could bring an electrical supply to the parking lots and some basic furniture, and then we could test people. They just had to stay in their cars and they would drive through and we would test them. Actually, that involved your testing at home. But what it also involved in is mass vaccinations with people driving through. So they were in the safety of their own cars and they did not get exposed to others, and it worked. And the key here is that we were comfortable being in cars. We were used to driving through. And it's something, actually, if we go to another innovation, it comes from 1948, when In-N-Out Burger created the very first drive-through restaurant with an intercom that was created by its founder, Harry Snyder. So that's one innovation building on another, but you can see that, how innovative we were, how imaginative we were, how we brought many people together and many skills together to produce the result. So bringing it back home, the question is, well, what does that mean for you, where you are? Are you involved with technical change? Okay, that's clear. What's needed? Are you involved with an adaptive change, in which case something new is needed? And for all the audience to really look and see for themselves what is valuable in the presentations back home. Again, you can reach out to me at my website or at jack@jgilbertassociates.com. I'm happy to talk to you about this and other presentations.